I have a little hyacinth flower in my hair today. It smelled real sweet, so I just tucked this stem behind my ear. During Purim, the rabbi said that the Messiah would make an appearance. And did he? After finding a few things, both today and yesterday, I was really kind of stunned. We know that during Purim, that the declaration from Donald Trump came declaring Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. We have Mike Pompeo, who happens to be on Israel's 70th birthday, the 70th United States Secretary of State incumbent, meaning he's the current holder of the office of the Secretary of State during Israel's 70th birthday, the 70th Secretary of State of the United States. Pompeo told reporters aboard his plane March 18th, "I'm going to Israel because of the important relationship we have." And then, that was during Purim. Who made an appearance in Israel during Purim? It says right there. Pompeo, who isn't meeting Netanyahu's chief election rival, ex-military chief of staff Benny Gantz, shrugged off questions about whether his appearance would be seen as an endorsement of the prime minister. Mike Pompeo made the appearance during Purim in place of Trump going there. I wanted to read something in Daniel 7, verse 20. It says, "And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that speaks very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows." That word stout, I typed in to see if anything came up, and this is what came up. I'm not saying this is a definite thing, but it says his look was more stout. But it's interesting that it says in an article, "The stout defense of the U.S. administration's foreign policy offered this week by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo left his audience in Brussels," and then the story goes on. So he used the word stout defense. Now I'm just going to point out a few things that have come to pass that I feel are just significant to report about. I'm not trying to project anything about anyone in particular. I'm just showing facts. So I just wanted to share this today. So I looked up the surname Pompeo, and it says Pompeo is both a masculine Italian given name and a surname derived from the Roman Pompeius. The word Pompeius in the Wikipedia is connected to the word Pompey, Pompey. It says Pompey, a military and political leader of the late Roman Republic, apparently fighting against Caesar. Mike Pompeo is a former Army officer, and he is also a graduate of the Harvard Law School. Pompeo's Christian faith is central in his life. He said he was brought to Jesus Christ during the early years as a cadet at the United States Military Academy at West Point by 2 of his classmates. He later became a member of Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Wichita, Kansas, where he served as a deacon from 2007 to 2009 and once taught Sunday school. It says about the Antichrist that he'll speak pompous words that are boastful. In 2017, Mike Pompeo was the head of the CIA. He was the CIA director from 2017 to 2018 and was appointed by Donald J. Trump. Of course, he's met with so many foreign dignitaries, including a meeting with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. On May 9, 2013, Pompeo introduced the Natural Gas Pipeline Permitting Reform Act. The bill would have required the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to approve or reject any proposal for a natural gas pipeline within 12 months. The bill passed the House of Representatives along party lines but was not voted on in the Senate. Mike and Susan Pompeo are affiliated with the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. Pompeo serves as a local church deacon and teaches Sunday school. In 2014, Pompeo told a church group that Christians needed to know that Jesus Christ as our Savior is the only solution for our world, end quote. In 2015, in a talk at a church, Pompeo said that, quote, politics is a never-ending struggle until the rapture, end quote. That's at the very end of the Wikipedia description about Mike Pompeo. It's at the very last sentence. But something extremely important that I want to mention here because of an article that just popped up on my cell phone today is this sentence here, and this is still in the Wikipedia about Mike Pompeo. It says, Pompeo then became president of Century International, an oil field equipment manufacturer that was also a partner of Koch Industries. So we have a connection to the oil field and oil industry. Now, why would that be important? Because the Golan Heights, as we know, and I'm going to read it from something I found online in Wikipedia called Genie Energy. Geni, Genie. South of Katsrin, in the southern Golan Heights in 2015, EFEC discovered a substantial amount of oil and natural gas reserves. Below that one, it says huge oil discovery on the Golan Heights. As a nation, Israel consumes 270,000 barrels of oil per day. Another article from The Economist says black gold under the Golan, just one catch, by The Economist. November 7th, 2015, geologists in Israel think they have found oil in very tricky territory. Geologists of Genie Oil and AMP Gas, a subsidiary of American-based Genie. Another article says, is there really more oil in the Golan Heights than in Saudi Arabia? Who's Genie Energy? The article states, this is why it gets no play, but this is one reason Obama was working to overthrow the Syrian government. They would not have political people on the Strategic Advisory Board if they did not need political strings pulled. Politically, you have the pipeline from Qatar being one major issue that was to complete with Russia in selling gas to Europe, which is why Putin is involved. He is not involved in Egypt, Israel, or even Afghanistan. This is the reason why Putin has an interest in Syria, and the mainstream media, of course, championed Obama, claiming he was defending children. Then we have Genie Oil and strategic oil reserves within occupied Syria. Just look at the people who are heavy hitters on the Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Oil. Not bad for a company nobody has heard of, and the glaring issue is, why do you need heavy hitters like this just to pump oil? Location, location, location. The mainstream media is not going to report on this issue. They even have Robert Murdoch on their Strategic Advisory Board. This is hush-hush in the mainstream media. The Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Oil and Gas advises management on strategic, financial, operational, and public policy matters. Few of the heavy hitters include Richard or Dick Cheney, Mary Landrieu, Rupert Murdoch, Bill Richardson, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Jacob Rothschild, Dr. Lawrence Summers, R. James Woolsey, Director of Central Intelligence, Dr. Lawrence Summers served as the 71st Secretary of the Treasury. Reuters, on March 12, 2019, had a headline, Pompeo calls on oil industry to support U.S. foreign policy. It says, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged the oil industry on Tuesday to work with the Trump administration to promote U.S. foreign policy. Right under those two articles, major oil reserves said found on Golan, the Times of Israel, on October 7, 2015. We're talking about a layer 250 meters thick. Yuval Bartov, chief geologist of AFEC Oil and Gas, a subsidiary of the American company Genie, said. U.S.-based Genie Energy confirms oil and gas find in the Golan Heights. Reported on October 9, 2015 by UPI.com, Energy News, major find. Genie Energy, a company with headquarters in the United States, confirmed it made a major discovery of oil and natural gas in the Golan Heights. Sorry, I dropped my computer. Now, with all that in mind, the rabbis saying that the Messiah was going to make an appearance on Purim, and here this says that Pompeo shrugged off questions about whether his appearance there at the Western Wall and in Jerusalem with the rabbis would be seen as an endorsement of the Prime Minister. And then there was this article on diplomatictimes.net. The title says, Secretary Pompeo suggests President Trump could be Messiah of Jewish nation. Really? Why would he do that if he believes that Jesus Christ is the Savior and that none of this will be solved until the rapture? So this article is worth reading, where it said, Secretary Pompeo suggests President Trump could be Messiah of Jewish nation. Really? By Gary Ronaldo, Diplomatic Times. In one of the most stunning political, religious statements made by senior administration official in recent memory, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo all but confirmed that God had raised up President Trump as a modern-day Messiah to save the Jewish nation from annihilation by Iran. Pompeo is currently in Jerusalem meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to offer support ahead of next month's tight election. Well, you know, he's probably discussing the peace deal, too. Trump moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem last year. In an interview Thursday with Chris Mitchell and David Brody of the conservative Christian Broadcasting Network, Pompeo stated, "It is possible that President Trump is meant to save the Jewish people." CBN question. And you also mentioned a Bible story last night when you had your statements with the Prime Minister. Today's being Purim, a celebration. Jews worldwide and here in Jerusalem are talking about the fact that Esther, 2,500 years ago, saved the Jewish people with God's help from Haman. And now, 2,500 years later, there's a new Haman here in the Middle East that wants to eradicate the Jewish people just like Haman did, the state of Iran. Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from the Iranian menace? End quote. Secretary Pompeo, quote, "As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago. If I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place and the work that our administration's done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East, that this Jewish state remains, I am confident that the Lord is at work here." Question. From foreign policy to the Dr. Phil portion of the interview, I can roll in the couch to you. Your faith is very important to you. Can you take me back to West Point? I know there was a time in your life where there was a decision point for you about just following Christ, and our audience would be very interested to hear a little bit more on that. Secretary Pompeo. So I grew up going to church on Sundays, but frankly, it wasn't a priority in my life growing up. I went off to West Point, and as a young cadet, during my freshman year, there were two young men who were juniors, who were true men of faith, and they held these little Bible study cookie clatches on Sunday afternoons. And they invited all the cadets to see. It was purely voluntary. And I started showing up, and truly remarkable, I started going to church every weekend on my own because I wanted to be there to learn and to grow. And at some point during that first year, I really did come to have an understanding of Jesus that was different than the one that I had had before. It fundamentally changed my life. Question. And now as Secretary of State, really before that, as you called yourself a backbencher from Kansas. It wasn't me earlier, but... Secretary Pompeo, that's a fair description. Laughter. Question. Okay, look where you are today, but your faith has informed your views clearly. And not only that, but you're not shy to talk about it. And I'm wondering about how that really manifests in your life. Secretary Pompeo. So of course my mission as Secretary of State, the thing I raised my right hand to do, I swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I've done that now a handful of times. First as a soldier, then as a member of Congress, then as the director of the CIA, now as Secretary of State. But in each of those missions, the task that I have is informed by my understanding of my faith, my belief in Jesus Christ as the Savior. It doesn't drive answers and outcomes every day. We all, as Christians, are searching, but it does inform how I try to treat every human being with dignity and respect in ways that Christians ought to. I don't always live up to that standard, but it does inform the way I think about the world. I think that makes a real difference, so I want people to know. That's why I talk about it from time to time. I want folks to know the perspective that I'm bringing to the challenges in the job that I face, and it also requires me to try to hold myself to the standards that the Christians hold themselves out for. Now, what made me start making this video actually was this thing that popped up on my cell phone from Politico magazine. The title is "Recording Reveals Oil Industry Execs Laughing at Trump Access." And it's the tape of a private meeting that was made shortly after the lawyer for an influential industry group was tapped for a high-level post at the Department of the Interior. Gathered for a private meeting at a beachside Ritz-Carlton in Southern California, the oil executives were celebrating a colleague's sudden rise. David Bernhardt, their former lawyer, had been appointed by President Donald Trump to the powerful number 2 spot at the Department of the Interior. This article is from Center for Western Priorities, Denver. A new analysis from the Center for Western Priorities found that oil and gas companies with ties to acting Interior Secretary David Bernhardt own 20% of all federal oil and gas leases that overlap with sage grouse habitat in 5 western states. Now, what I'm telling you is not my opinion. I'm just reading articles that are available online. And this one is dated March 5th of 2016. How Koch, K-O-C-H, oil-funded climate deniers inserted themselves into natural gas debate in Israel. Individuals and groups associated with climate denial have recently inserted themselves into the raging public debates over the use of Israel's newly discovered natural gas fields. Sparked in 2010, the contentious debate surrounding the offshore fields has largely revolved around how to allocate royalties and ownership rights rather than whether to extract the enormous amounts of gas in the first place. There are many reasons for this narrow framing. One is inability of Israel's environmentalists to shift the discourse in a way that will take into account the global imperative of keeping fossil fuels in the ground to stave off climate catastrophe. As was evident in the lost battle over the construction of the Trans-Israel Highway, another privatized infrastructure project, the country's greenways always seem to be steep behind quick global investors and multinational corporations. I want to skip ahead because this paragraph is kind of interesting. Meet the Israeli branch of the Ayn Rand Institute. Last July, the Israeli Parliament's Committee on Economics held several key deliberations ahead of a looming final government decision over the gas deal with Houston-based Noble Energy and its minority Israeli partners. One of those who testified in person at the hearings was Boaz Arad, who presented himself as director of the Ayn Rand Center Israel. Arad, who works in computer products marketing, berated those who opposed the gas deal and denounced the very idea of a common resource and urged the government to make concessions to the multinational consortium. What's really interesting is that while I've been looking up these articles, my computer has shut down the articles numerous times, and then I go to type in the search box and starts typing in Hebrew. Look at this. I just started typing on my computer. Look at this. And it's typing in Hebrew. How can that be? Unless somebody's spying on what I'm doing. Now, a lot of these oil and gas companies are connected, and the ones in Houston, of course, are involved, and the one called Noble Energy. In December 2010, the Noble Energy Company announced the discovery of the Leviathan gas field offshore Israel. So now we can see that something did happen at Purim, that somebody did appear there and put a note in the Western Wall and was there to represent Donald Trump, and it was Mike Pompeo. And all of these connections to the oil industry, the oil and natural gas that's happening, is connected and very significant. So I'm just connecting the oil part of it to the part of it of Pompeo and why he's there and why they secured the Golan Heights.
Yeah, talk to me.